Okay, hello. My pleasure to welcome you to this OTORIO webinar. Today we'll be discussing the results of our 2022 OT Cybersecurity Survey. My name is Dave Cullen, and I'm a field CTO. I recently joined OTORIO after spending 10 plus years in the utility industry, focused on cybersecurity, policy, and governance. Our agenda today is simple. To highlight key findings and expand upon the themes that we saw through the responses. First, a bit about our methodology. We surveyed 200 cybersecurity leaders from North America, Latin America, and Europe, ranging from about 250 employees to more than 10,000. Sector coverage was energy and utilities, oil and gas, mining, and alternative energy. Now note that many of our charts might have percentages that don't add up to 100%. That's because we asked certain questions. We allowed multiple answers to be selected. Okay, so over the past 3 years, we have seen, we have about 98% of respondents have seen an increase in the level of digital and cyber risk. For 67%, this increase has been significant. 31% saw a slight increase. Certainly some of this comes from the high profile attacks like we saw in the supply chain and OT vulnerabilities. But I also think it's due to a greater awareness of the threats around us. The fact that NIST recorded the 5th straight year of record vulnerability numbers speaks to the fact that we are looking deeper and wider for vulnerabilities and threats. Yet we have to acknowledge over the past 3 years, or 2 years, sorry, we have experienced a new paradigm of work and, through remote flexible work through the pandemic. And this forced rapid change of an organization's topology, attack surface, certainly has a habit of increasing the risk just as quick. So let's look at the top OT cybersecurity concerns. Supply chain is a clear winner. It is front of mind, and certainly we will dig deeper into that in the following slides. Now, if you look at the percentages for physical and damage and production downtime, we see the importance of availability being reinforced. It lines up, data leakage and insider threats certainly lines up with research that OTORIO performed in 2021. Our research team did a public sweep of public sources and found an alarming amount of OT-related data, such as project files, configurations, et cetera, available on the public internet. And sometimes the data even contained critical intellectual property. And this is a serious concern. The other thing we are seeing is IT threats creeping into the OT space. And certainly we'll dig into this a little deeper in this presentation, but ransomware, phishing, traditional IT attack vectors are now focused in the OT realm. We could spend a lot of time arguing about whether or this is a reality or not, but I think what we have seen that it is. Progress, competitive advantage, and other business factors are really driving digitization as well. And this is changing the threat landscape. Now let's dig into supply chain. 99% of respondents were impacted by a supply chain attack. 99%. Like it or not, the threat is real. Previously, this may have been more of an IT concern, but with increased convergence, these attacks now have a greater ability to impact OT. Certain high-profile attacks like SolarWinds, Kaseya, and more have received a lot of attention, media and elsewhere. And then look at something as ubiquitous as Log4j, which does exist under the hood in some OT platforms. Without proper security design in the OT environment, it becomes more difficult to contain these risks. I think this highlights an opportunity for IT and OT to work closely together. We need to be acutely aware of the potential impact that a supply chain attack has on all environments. Now, another strategy might be to require some form of cybersecurity certificate from your vendors. Now, 64% of our respondents have always required this from vendors, and 32% started in 2021. And I think that's a big number. And it really speaks to this increase in awareness. Now, hopefully we are achieving critical mass, but progress can be hampered since there are a large number of fairly small vendors that will not be able to keep up with the requirements going forward. Overall, supply chain security is difficult, but the more supply chain vendors we have doing cybersecurity factory acceptance testing and offering periodical assessments as updates and changes are made, the better. Now, an interesting point from a discussion that we had with a colleague from an OTORIO partner. He brought forward something that I think is important to note on this topic, and that's a large portion of organizations will move into their customers' digital supply chain and the challenges that come with that as they transition from being product or hardware vendors into more provider of services and information. We may be just seeing the tip of the iceberg of the work required to secure the supply chain. Now, throughout, we want to do a few poll questions here. So we're going to post our first poll question and just pause for about 30 seconds or so. Appreciate your response because we started to see certain trends. So we just want to get a gauge of what you're experiencing. So the first question's up now about your top OT cybersecurity concern. Okay, we share the results there. We see that supply chain always wins, but I think it really does reinforce what we saw in this survey. Supply chain is a factor, but we are seeing the change in dynamics in these environments that are driving new challenges, new attack vectors to consider. As we digitize and move forward. Okay, so let's keep going. So let's look at compliance. We looked at the drivers for OT cybersecurity, and so as we look at that landscape, I think we see that compliance is a significant driver. Government and regulators have been working to promote improvement of cybersecurity posture. And we continue to see sectors like utilities, lead in this area. No doubt a result of NERC-CIP and the compliance frameworks continuing to evolve. But when we look at the drivers and the factors that are prompting organizations to kind of focus on OT security and investments and beyond compliance, we see that digitization and growth is really speaking to the high rate of change that both compliance and digitization drive. We see merger and acquisitions as a factor. It drives growth, but it also drives challenges to harmonize environments. And the threat of cybersecurity attacks still has the ability to keep us up at night. With the higher percentages, you can see the pressure that our OT and IT security teams are under to adapt and keep these environments protected. It demonstrates really, I think, the need for OT and IT security teams or personnel to work together. And in some environments, this would be a distinct cultural shift. However, without collaboration, the odds of keeping the environment safe are really stacked against us. But at the end of the day, even though it might show lower on the chart, we can't lose sight of availability and safety being the primary objectives in an OT environment. As we plan for change and adapt, we must always keep this in focus. So if we look at the rate of change in regulation, certainly we see, again, energy and utilities leading the way. And, it looks like there's some work to be done in oil and gas. And we won't pick on water treatment, but it has a long way to go. But the good news is we saw momentum on that front in 2021. Perhaps on the heels of high-profile attacks such as Colonial Pipeline and the City of Oldsmar water treatment plant, but we see work being done. We see compliance frameworks being discussed and government directives coming out. And I think that's very encouraging. There's momentum there and drawing awareness to cybersecurity requirements. So we're going to move on to our second poll question. So existing cybersecurity solutions challenges. We'll be interested to see if this lines up with the survey data in a moment. Okay. So we'll talk about this in a moment, but lack of skills to operate is number one, and mitigation actions not feasible, number two, and then alert fatigue, number three. I think we'll see this stay consistent. But let's talk about the responsibility for OT security and what we saw in the responses. So 47% of respondents said that they have an in-house team to manage OT cybersecurity. 53% rely heavily on managed services. 41% outsource OT cybersecurity completely, and about 12% have a hybrid team. OT cybersecurity, we all know, is a unique skill set. We often talk about the skills gap, I think, in IT cybersecurity, but I believe that OT simply amplifies this. So the question remains, how do we build capacity? The capacity we need to protect these environments. I think it takes an intentional effort to bring up the knowledge within organizations. And I think ideally it happens internally. Might not always be practical. So looking to work with strategic partners where needed is also a sound strategy. Now, if we look at the dynamics of in organizations, who is responsible, we still see that a large percentage sits within the engineering department, the VP of engineering, or where OT really the factory floor has been managed for a long time, and that rated about 31%. But what we also saw was the rise of CISO and BISO oversight. And I'm encouraged by this because it speaks to the changing cultural shift to organizations realizing that security is a pillar and needs to be, have that C-level oversight. Because beyond the CISO and BISO, we also saw a high level of CEO and COO oversight. And I think that sometimes that might come from a regulated environments or what have you, but I believe that top top management has really taken a huge leap forward lately in being aware of security challenges. So let's talk about existing OT security solutions. And I think it's closely related to the stats we're seeing on the management and skills dynamic. There is strong sentiment that the value proposition from existing OT security solutions is falling short. There are signs that the complexity is overwhelming and that there's a lack of skills to operate, too complicated to use, hard to prioritize. So from this, we can see that context is important. We saw it in the results that 44% have experienced alert fatigue. The lack of business context is a factor. But what I noticed is 49% who said that mitigation actions are not feasible. And I believe this when we have taken an IT-centric approach and baked it into OT security tools. There's always the risk that the necessary OT context isn't fully realized. Patching is not always a solution in an OT environment. Availability is priority one in the OT environment, where IT tends to focus more on integrity and confidentiality. Solutions should be able to provide the appropriate context to the audience, whether it's the engineering manager overseeing the plant floor, or the IT SOC analyst who has been tasked with OT security monitoring. Now, along the same lines, a focus on detection has really translated from IT security to OT security. Back to that point of availability, which along with safety are the first priority, we need to be careful with detection and response in the OT environment. It may not be possible to do an emergency shutdown, for example, on a process to isolate a threat. Focusing on assessing OT security design and the overall security posture of the environment is crucial. Protection is key here. And we need to ensure that basic hygiene is addressed and assessed. I often like to say that the concepts here really are simple, but they're definitely not easy. We have to deal with the technical debt, legacy equipment, harsh environments, a lot of challenges, but knowing what an environment has and how it's configured is fundamental to being able to defend that environment. So on that note, we did ask our 200 CISOs to assess their level of OT and network asset visibility. You'll see here that the industries with more regulation are faring much better. And not to pick on water treatment, but there are some concerns here. And I mean, these are not unfounded with the recent directives we've seen, at least in the US, to drive regulation and create cybersecurity, implement cybersecurity frameworks. Now, if we look at stats related to company size, I think it's natural to assume that larger companies have the resources to fare better in OT security and network asset visibility. Yet we see here that the opposite is true. It is so easy, I think, to feel like we're the only ones experiencing a certain set of challenges or roadblocks. Yet the data shows that the issues are more universal than what one might assume. And it's usually the consequences that differ from organization to organization. And so here we have another poll question. This will be on compliance frameworks. So we're wondering if we're starting to see the advent of multiple frameworks that we need to, that you need to comply with. Okay. So we see that I think yes is a growing number, and I think this is geography based as well. But it was just a gut instinct as well that we're starting to see that multiple frameworks being required. And I've worked in a context in a utility where that was the case. So we'll continue to kind of watch that trend. Okay, so let's talk about OT cybersecurity budget growth. I think that this is impressive. Most companies are aiming to increase their OT cybersecurity budget by over 50%. And again, I think this speaks to the awareness that OT cybersecurity needs attention now. I think it's also important to note that the responses ranging from like a decrease up into that like 10% increase is such a low percentage. We need this level of sustained investment to make these necessary improvements for our OT environments, many of which we all know they've been in place for a very long time. So again, in environments where safety and availability is job number one, the answer isn't always to rip and replace, and it's definitely not always easy. So this is a complex task, and it's going to be an expensive task. So let's draw some conclusions. The first is, now is the time to act. We can see that there are many forces working against progress in OT cybersecurity. And we can expect the threat landscape to change, get worse, what have you. But there's good news, is that we are kind of all in this together. And I think we at OTORIO have seen a genuine desire for organizations to collaborate and share ideas with one another. And this is very encouraging. Hold your supply chain accountable, whether it's a cyber certificate or policy language. Ensure that your trusted partners are at least as concerned about cybersecurity as you are. And I think this extends a little further, that when it comes to cyber insurance and that whole industry, is the more we do to hold our vendors accountable, it helps with that whole process as well. Reducing risk and making things as predictable as possible will help maintain cyber insurance. Whole different topic, but again, the supply chain has to be held accountable. And I think awareness is driving discussion and action. You know, we've seen the positive signs from the survey data. I think with the investment that's being planned, and compliance continues to be a great foundation to build upon, you can really build out an OT cybersecurity program that helps bring you to a different level of maturity. And again, it's going to take time and it takes money, but I think that we're very encouraged by the signs that we saw through this survey. Invest in knowledge. I think there's really a great opportunity to get the fundamentals right, manage risk, improve the security posture of your OT environment. You can only really do that if you're building up the knowledge of the people on your team, and also bringing in strategic partners that can enhance that level of knowledge. And then I would look at automation where you can. Build up expertise, but augment it with automation. Again, we need to get the fundamentals right. And that is our report on our survey. We actually are going to open up the chat now for a Q&A session. Make this as interactive as we can. I'm happy to answer questions and hear perspective. I apologize, I'll have to look down to see my screen, so I won't be at camera. Okay, so we have a question here. What are some practical ways that IT and security can work together? So I'm going to split this into two parts. We'll start with the easy one, which is technology. Is that I believe when you look at how data is presented in your security tools, and when you are looking at how data is collected with your security tools, look for the integration capability. So if your OT security solution can ingest the necessary context from IT solutions, like whether it's your EDR, firewall, et cetera, just to enrich the information, that helps kind of bring in that IT context. Perhaps if there's a convergence point or what have you, helps monitor that. But as well in how you present the data, how it comes back out. The plant floor has a different set of requirements in terms of its visibility and what it's interested in than, say, your security operations center. So look on how you can build integrations to be able to give the information at the right time to the right person in the right context. So IT SOC analysts might want to see raw data and more information surrounding an alert. Whereas, on the plant floor, they just might want an actionable insight. Now, the second is with people. And this is the challenging one, is to have that cultural shift with blending OT and IT. They need to work together. They need to be aware. They need to be sharing ideas. We often see the scenario as well where the IT security team has now suddenly been tasked with OT security. So they need help. They need knowledge as to what's important on the factory floor. So it really needs to be collaborative. Okay, then another question come in. How would you measure maturity against a compliance framework? And this is a good one. It can be geography dependent, but there's many different maturity models that get applied to our compliance frameworks. And they all tend to be fairly similar. So whether it's C2, M2, CMMI, CMMC, all the acronyms we can throw out there, we look at those maturity levels, moving from ad hoc, you have something in place, or you don't have it maybe, but ad hoc, the technology might exist, this capability does exist in the environment, up to more of a repeatable fashion. And then beyond to, that to the highest level of maturity, typically it's repeatable and measured. So there's many different frameworks that we must adhere to, but usually there's a related maturity measurement. So it's good to look into that and really be able to kind of track progress against that. It helps set the benchmarks. Now, a lot of that can't be done purely, or without the support of the business. It needs to be an extension of kind of the mission and vision values of the organization, such that you can prioritize what's important. We're not going to be top level maturity in every single control. So I just, again, recommend to really tie that to the culture of the business. Okay, we have another question come in. Should the OT and IT environments be monitored separately, like two different tenants? Or should there be contextualization and correlation between the environments? My easy way out of that question would be to say it depends, but I think we are in a day and age where that distinct physical air gap is less and less prevalent. If the distinct air gap is there and can be proven, then you monitor them and you treat them separate. If it cannot, then I think there is a lot of value in looking at your convergence points and bringing that monitoring together. Now, more than likely, those are different tools. We have not seen a great efficacy of just putting an IT security tool into the OT environment and having success. So again, back to how we integrate things, they should be able to, excuse me, be able to talk to one another. And you need to be bringing that information in to those panes of glass that are important for your organizational teams. So the teams might still be islanded, but the base information should be able to move around. And then, I mean, I think what that gives you, if you're successful, is that context, the proper context and correlation, right? You should be able to detect something moving through. Hopefully your design prevents that, but you always need to be checking that and auditing that. And I think focusing on protection as much, because oftentimes it's, we will naturally focus on detection, but I think applying more focus on protection really does help in this area. Okay. Well, with that, really want to thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. I think we saw a lot of great information come out of this survey. Thank you for the people who responded to it. And really, we're excited to see what 2022 brings with the investment and the growth that people are projecting. It can sometimes seem like scary times, but I think they're very exciting times. So with that, I would, again, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay safe.